The fluorescent lights of the empty hospital corridor hummed, a stark contrast to the silent sobs shaking Clara's shoulders. Hunched on a cold, forgotten bench, the nurse who mended everyone else's broken pieces finally let her own carefully guarded pain shatter through. She thought no one saw the tears streaming down her face, the exhaustion that went bone deep, but behind her, unseen, an elderly patient in a wheelchair was quietly reaching out, a small, handmade card clutched in his frail hand, a silent promise of understanding that would change everything. Clara moved through the demanding rhythms of St. Jude's Hospital with a practiced grace, her smile a gentle shield. For a decade, this had been her world, a calling she poured her very essence into. She knew Mrs. Gable in 204 needed her chamomile tea with precisely one sugar cube to coax a restful night. She knew young Timmy in pediatrics, terrified of needles, could be bribed into bravery with a story about a plucky stegosaurus and a dinosaur sticker strategically placed. She anticipated Mr. Rodriguez's anxious daily litany of questions about his wife's slow recovery, answering each one with inexhaustible patience, offering reassurance where it was most desperately sought. There was a time she'd stayed hours past her shift, long after the hospital's pulse had quieted, to hold the trembling hand of Mrs. Petrov, a woman whose family was trapped by a blizzard, unable to reach her bedside. Clara had murmured stories from her own girlhood, nonsense tales and comforting words, until Mrs. Petrov's fear-tightened face softened into sleep. She transformed sterile examination rooms into lands of make-believe for frightened children, her surgical glove puppets eliciting precious giggles before difficult procedures. To her colleagues, she was Clara the calm, the ever-dependable nurse who'd take the extra shift without complaint, who navigated crises with an almost supernatural composure. "Ask Clara," was the common refrain. "She'll sort it." She never let the strain show, never hinted at the weariness that settled in her bones like a permanent chill. But beneath the surface, a quiet erosion was taking place. Her small apartment, just a few blocks from the hospital, was a monument to her fatigue. It was impeccably neat, almost unervingly so, yet it echoed with profound silence that grew heavier with each passing night she returned to its solitude. Dinner was frequently a lukewarm microwave meal, eaten standing at the kitchen counter, her mind still a whirlwind of the day's emergencies, the small, hard-won victories, and the heartbreaking losses that chipped away at her soul. The true weight, the relentless ache that shadowed her every quiet moment, was the gnawing anxiety for her mother, Eleanor, living hundreds of miles away in the small town Clara had left behind. Eleanor's health was failing, a slow, cruel decline. Each phone call from her sister, Sarah, was a fresh stab of dread, new symptoms, vague doctors, and the crushing guilt of being so far away when she was needed most. The medical bills for Eleanor's care were a silently accumulating avalanche, a debt that felt impossible to surmount. Clara often found herself skipping meals, telling herself she simply wasn't hungry, or volunteering for extra night shifts, pushing her already exhausted body to its absolute limit. Every spare cent was funneled to Sarah, with desperate instructions to secure the best specialists, the second opinions, anything that might offer a glimmer of hope. She rarely spoke of this immense pressure to anyone at St. Jude's. It was her private war, fought in the dim pre-dawn light as she forced herself out of bed, her reflection in the mirror showing eyes haunted by a weariness far beyond her 30-odd years. Or it was fought in the scalding rush of the shower, tears mingling with the water, washed away before she had to reconstruct her professional smile for the day ahead. She was a healer, yes, tending to the broken and the suffering with such profound tenderness. But who? She often wondered in the desolate quiet of her empty apartment. Healed the healer when her own heart was breaking. Into this landscape of quiet desperation and carefully concealed pain came Mr. Arthur Henderson, admitted to room 312. He was a man of quiet demeanor, slight of build, in his late 70s, recovering from a complex hip replacement. His chart noted him as a retired librarian, widowed, with no family nearby to offer comfort or company. Clara, assigned as one of his primary nurses, greeted him on her morning rounds with her customary gentle professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," she offered, her voice soft as she plumped his pillows and checked the array of monitors beside his bed. "I'm Clara. I'll be one of your nurses today. How are you feeling this morning?" He gave a brief nod, his pale blue eyes, surprisingly sharp and observant, flicking towards her for a moment. "A little better, thank you," he replied, his voice a dry whisper. Those eyes, however, didn't just glance. They watched. They followed her precise, efficient movements as she checked his vitals, adjusted his foredrip, and made meticulous notes on his chart. It wasn't an intrusive gaze, but rather one filled with a kind of quiet, thoughtful scrutiny. Clara, well-versed in the myriad personalities of her patients, from the boisterous to the deeply withdrawn, simply focused on providing him with exemplary care. She ensured his water pitcher was always filled with fresh ice, noticing his subtle preference. She positioned his pillows just so, anticipating his need for comfort before he could voice it. She explained each new medication with unhurried clarity, patiently answering his few, carefully articulated questions. She didn't initially register the way his gaze would sometimes linger on her face when she thought he was focused on his chart. She didn't perceive the slight furrow in his brow when she'd inadvertently stifle a yawn, her professional smile not quite reaching her tired eyes after a particularly brutal double shift. Mr. Henderson had spent a lifetime surrounded by stories, by the myriad narratives bound within the covers of countless books. He had, over those quiet decades, honed the ability to read the unwritten tales etched on human faces, the subtle language of concealed emotion. He saw the forced cheerfulness in Clara's morning greetings, a brightness that sometimes frayed at the edges. He noted the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she poured his medication after a seemingly endless night shift, a tremor she quickly mastered. He saw the momentary sag in her shoulders, a flicker of profound, almost unbearable weariness, before she'd straighten them, affix a professional smile, and move on to the next waiting patient, the next ringing call bell, the next unfolding crisis. He had observed other nurses. Some were efficient but brisk, others warm yet palpably distracted. But in Clara, there was a depth of quiet sorrow, a profound weariness that seemed to emanate from her very core, and it resonated with something deep within him, an empathetic core that had long defined his gentle nature. He noticed she was always the one lingering late, the one volunteering for the most demanding tasks, the one who took on the most challenging patients without a whisper of complaint. He heard her soft, calming voice drifting from adjacent rooms, soothing agitated souls, comforting frightened families. And he saw, with a growing sense of unease, the toll it was taking. The breaking point for Clara arrived on a bleak, rain-lashed Tuesday. The shift had been a relentless onslaught from the moment she clocked in. It started with a cold blue in the ICU, a desperate, chaotic scramble to save a life that, despite their every heroic effort, ultimately slipped through their fingers. The air in the unit had been thick with unspoken grief, a suffocating blanket of loss that Clara carried with her as she moved to her next duties. This was followed by an intensely difficult conversation with a newly bereaved family, trying to offer solace where no words could possibly suffice for their raw, gaping pain. Then, during a hurried, stolen 5-minute break, a moment she had desperately hoped to use just to catch her breath, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was Sarah, her sister. Clara ducked into the relative sanctuary of the deserted staff lounge, her stomach clenching with familiar dread. Sarah's voice was thin, stretched taut with anxiety. "Clara, it's Mom," she began, and a chill snaked down Clara's spine. She had a terrible night. Really terrible. The doctors, they're very worried, Clara. They're talking about hospice. The word hung in the air, sucking the oxygen from the room. The sterile, familiar scent of the hospital suddenly felt cloying, unbearable. Her meticulously constructed composure, already fractured, began to disintegrate. I'll call you back later, Sarah. I'm at work, she managed, her voice a choked whisper, before ending the call, her hand trembling so violently she could barely press the button. She needed air. She needed a moment, a hidden space where the mask could finally drop, where the tears that burned behind her eyelids could finally fall. She found a deserted bench at the far end of a long, dimly lit service corridor, a forgotten corner usually cluttered with unused gurneys and linen carts. There, shielded from the relentless activity of the wards, hidden from the well-meaning but potentially intrusive eyes of her colleagues, Clara finally allowed the dam of her grief to break. Silent, agonizing sobs racked her frame, shaking her from head to toe. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unrelenting, washing away the carefully maintained facade of Nurse Clara, the strong one, the capable one, the one who always held it together. In that moment, she felt utterly, devastatingly alone, crushed beneath the unbearable weight of her mother's illness, the ceaseless demands of her job, and the suffocating fear of an uncertain future. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with the force of her silent weeping. Unbeknownst to her, Mr. Arthur Henderson, on one of his prescribed, slow ambulations down the corridor to aid his hip's recovery, his walker clicking softly, rhythmically on the polished linoleum, had just turned that very corner. He had been aiming for the small, grimy window at the corridor's end, hoping for a glimpse of the stormy world outside. Instead, he saw her, Nurse Clara, the compassionate, ever-capable nurse who had shown him such consistent, gentle kindness, now a study in raw, unfiltered grief, huddled and broken on the old bench. He froze, his immediate instinct to approach, to offer some word of comfort, warring with profound reluctance to intrude on such a private, painful moment. He saw the depth of her distress, the uncontrolled shaking of her shoulders, the muffled sounds of her weeping, and his heart, a heart that had known its own deep sorrows, ached with fierce empathy for her. He stood there for a long, silent moment, an unwilling witness to her anguish. Then, with a soft, almost inaudible sigh, he carefully, reverently backed away. He turned his walker with painstaking slowness and retreated, leaving her to her sorrow, but carrying the indelible image of her pain with him, his own eyes unexpectedly moist. The following afternoon, as Clara was making her rounds, her eyes still slightly swollen, but her professional composure firmly re-established, she entered Mr. Henderson's room. He was sitting propped up in bed, a faint, almost hesitant smile gracing his lips. He seemed a fraction brighter than the day before. "Good afternoon, Mr. Henderson," Clara said, her voice even, imbued with her usual warmth. "How are we feeling today? Did you manage to get some decent rest?" "A little, thank you, my dear girl," he replied, his gaze gentle and unusually direct. She proceeded with her checks, ensuring his pain was well managed, and was about to depart with her customary, "Please call if you need anything at all," when he cleared his throat softly. "Nurse Clara?" She turned, anticipating a request for more ice water, or perhaps a question about the timing of his next medication. Instead, he was holding out a small, folded piece of what appeared to be a paper napkin. It was slightly creased, as if it had been handled with great care, or perhaps refolded several times in indecision. This is for you." Clara, a flicker of puzzlement in her eyes, took it from his outstretched hand. His fingers felt papery thin, surprisingly cool against hers. She unfolded it with a sense of gentle curiosity. On it, drawn with a blue ballpoint pen, likely pilfered from the nurse's station, was a simple, endearingly wobbly drawing of a single flower. It was more heart and earnest effort than botanical accuracy, but its intent was unmistakable. Beneath it, in neat, elderly script that spoke of a bygone era of careful penmanship, were the words, "Thank you for your sunshine, even when it's cloudy for you. H room 312. Clara stared at the makeshift card, her breath hitching in her throat. The simple, heartfelt words, the childlike purity of the drawing, they pierced through her layers of carefully constructed defenses, through the exhaustion and the grief, with an unexpected, startling warmth that spread through her chest like a bomb. Her eyes welled instantly, the professional mask dissolving without her bidding. She looked up at Mr. Henderson, truly looked at him, and saw not just a patient, not just room 312, but a kind, profoundly observant soul who had seen her. He had truly seen her pain, her hidden struggle, and had chosen to acknowledge it with such a tender, unassuming gesture of pure human kindness. "Mr. Henderson," Clara began, her voice thick with unshed tears, the words catching in her throat, suddenly inadequate. This is the kindest thing. "I thank you." A genuine smile, the first she felt had truly reached her eyes in what felt like an eternity, bloomed on her face, wobbly but undeniably sincere. That simple, creased napkin felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. He simply patted her hand where it rested on the bed rail, his own touchlight, but conveying surprising reassurance. "We all have our cloudy days, my dear," he said, his voice imbued with a gentle wisdom. "It's important to remember the sun is still there, shining brightly, even if we can't always see it through the storm." From that day forward, a subtle but profound shift occurred in the dynamic between them. Their interactions, though still necessarily brief due to the relentless demands of Clara's schedule, now carried a new depth, a quiet, unspoken understanding. Clara found herself lingering a moment or two longer in his room, not just as Nurse Clara performing her duties, but as, well, perhaps something akin to a confidant, a friend. She learned that his late wife, also named Eleanor, a coincidence that struck Clara with a poignant pang, had passionately loved gardening, which explained his earnest attempt at drawing a flower on the napkin. She could make anything bloom, that woman, he'd said, a fond, faraway softness in his eyes. Had the greenest thumbs in the entire county. He'd told her he'd been a librarian at the city's main branch for over 40 years, a custodian of stories and a quiet, lifelong observer of the human condition. Now, it seemed, he was a gentle observer of the myriad stories unfolding around him in the microcosm of the hospital. He spoke of the solace of books, the vast world they held, the escape and profound comfort they offered. He even recommended a few specific authors she might enjoy, ones as Eleanor had particularly cherished. One quiet afternoon, during an unexpected lull in the ward's usual frantic activity, emboldened by his quiet, non-judgmental empathy in the safe, comforting space his gentle presence seemed to create, Clara found herself confiding in him about her mother. The words, hesitant at first, soon tumbled out with more ease, a release of long-held anxieties. She's not doing well at all, Mr. Henderson," she admitted, the familiar vice tightening around her chest. "And I feel so utterly helpless, being so far away, you know? The bills, it's all just so much to bear." Mr. Henderson didn't offer hollow platitudes or attempt to dismiss her fears with generic, well-meaning reassurances. He simply listened, his gaze steady and deeply compassionate, his head nodding slightly in understanding as she spoke. When she finally fell silent, a heavy quiet filled the room for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence imbued with shared humanity, with profound understanding. It's a heavy burden indeed, caring for those we love, especially when distance separates us, he said at last, his voice soft, laced with quiet wisdom that resonated deeply with Clara. "And it's a double burden, my dear, when you spend your days and nights pouring yourself out caring for others as well. But your care for your mother, Clara, even from this distance, is a powerful, tangible thing. She knows your heart. She feels your love across the miles." Don't you ever doubt that for a single moment. His words were like a soothing balm to her frayed, overstretched nerves, a rare moment of genuine connection in her often isolating, high-pressure world. Later that same day, Mr. Henderson asked her if she could perhaps procure him some extra sheets of paper from a nurse's station, and maybe a few more pens. My penmanship has grown a bit rusty, you see. Cooped up in this bed all day, he explained with a faint, mischievous twinkle in his eye. A fellow needs a practice, keep the old skills sharp. Clara, genuinely happy to oblige any request from him, readily brought him a small stack of plain printer paper and a handful of ballpoint pens. She thought little of it, assuming he merely wanted to jot down notes or perhaps compose a letter. Soon, however, she began to notice that Mr. Henderson was often busy at his bedside table, propped up against his pillows, sketching or writing with quiet, focused concentration. It wasn't just for her anymore, she gradually realized. One morning, she saw him discreetly pass a small, neatly folded note, very similar to the one he had given her, to a flustered young orderly named Javier. Javier had patiently and with extraordinary kindness helped him with a particularly difficult and somewhat awkward transfer to a commode chair earlier. Javier had looked utterly surprised. Then a slow, deeply appreciative smile had spread across his tired face as he read the note, tucking it carefully into his pocket. Later that week, she overheard another nurse, Maria, a seasoned veteran with a sometimes gruff, no-nonsense exterior but a heart of solid gold, exclaiming softly at the nurse's station, "Look at this! Mr. Henderson from 312 gave it to me. It's a little drawing of a robin. He said I reminded him of a cheerful, busy bird, always flitting about, getting things done." Maria's habitual frown was momentarily replaced by a rare, soft, almost shy smile as she smoothed the paper. Mr. Henderson's small, thoughtful act of recognition, his little notes of heartfelt appreciation, began to ripple outwards. Tiny pebbles of kindness dropped into the often turbulent, high-stress waters of a sprawling hospital. He seemed to possess an uncanny, gentle ability to notice the unnoticed, to acknowledge the small, everyday efforts, the quiet dedication of the staff who cared for him and for so many others. And Clara, watching this quiet phenomenon unfold, felt her own heart lighten, warmed immeasurably by a simple, pervasive, unassuming goodness. The day of Mr. Henderson's discharge arrived sooner than Clara had anticipated. He was recovering remarkably well, his mobility greatly improved thanks to the diligent work of the physical therapy team, and he was deemed ready to return to his quiet, independent life. As Clara helped with his final preparations, carefully gathering his few belongings, a distinct sense of melancholy settled over her. She knew she would profoundly miss their quiet, insightful conversations, his gentle wisdom, the unexpected way his presence had become a small, steady anchor in her often stormy, overwhelming days. "Nurse Clara," he said, his voice noticeably stronger now, clearer and more resonant than when he had first arrived. He was dressed in his own clothes, a neatly pressed shirt and comfortable trousers, looking much more like the distinguished, retired librarian he was. "Before I depart and the transport arrives to collect me, could you perhaps assist me with one last small thing?" He reached into the small, worn canvas satchel that contained his few belongings, a well-thumbed book of poetry, a pair of sturdy spectacles, a few other personal items, and carefully pulled out a proper greeting card. It wasn't a folded napkin this time, but good quality card, one with a serene, printed landscape of rolling green hills and a soft, hazy sunset on the front. It looked like something her own mother, Eleanor, might have chosen. He held it out to her. "This is for you." Clara's heart gave a little flutter of surprise and anticipation. She took the card, her fingers tracing the slightly embossed image on the front. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, you really shouldn't have," she murmured, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gesture. She opened it carefully, a sense of warmth already spreading through her. Inside, beneath another more practiced and surprisingly detailed drawing of a flower, a beautiful, deep red rose this time, remarkably well rendered, were words written in familiar, neat, elegant script. To Clara, whose incandescent light shines so brightly, even in the deepest, most pervasive shadows. Thank you for seeing the person beyond the patient chart, and for so generously sharing your precious strength when you clearly had so very little to spare for yourself. Your kindness, my dear, is a rare and truly precious gift to this world. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes as she read his heartfelt, deeply perceptive message. But as her gaze drifted lower, beneath his carefully penned signature, she saw something else, something tucked discreetly inside the fold of the card. A check, made out to Clara Davies. Clara gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth in astonishment, the card trembling in her grasp. The amount written on the check was substantial, overwhelmingly so, more than she earned in several months of grueling, relentless shifts. It was enough. Enough to cover her mother's mountain of outstanding medical bills, with a significant amount left over. Mr. Henderson, I simply can't accept this, she stammered, her mind reeling, a chaotic whirlwind of shock, profound disbelief, an overwhelming surge of almost unbearable emotion. It's far too much. I couldn't possibly. He smiled gently, his pale blue eyes filled with a kind, unwavering sincerity that brooked no argument. My dear Clara, please. You must. Allow an old man this small pleasure. My wife, Eleanor. As I may have mentioned, she was an incredibly astute woman, not just with literature, you see, but with finances as well. She made some very wise, very prudent investments many, many years ago. We were comfortable, more than comfortable, really, in our quiet, unassuming way. His eyes grew misty, and he paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, or perhaps fortify his courage for what he was about to say. We were never blessed with children of our own, Eleanor and I. It was a quiet sorrow we carried, but we found joy in other avenues, in each other, in our books, in our community. And we always talk about how we would eventually use what we had carefully saved to make a genuine difference, however small it might seem, to support those rare individuals who truly embody kindness and compassion in this often harsh and indifferent world. He looked directly at Clara then, his gaze holding hers with a gentle intensity. Eleanor would have absolutely adored you, Clara. She had an unerring gift for recognizing genuine goodness in people. She always used to say that the greatest, most valuable gift one could possess was a truly compassionate heart. You have that gift in abundance, my dear girl. I saw your pain that awful night in the corridor, a pain you tried so desperately, so bravely to hide from the world. And I saw your unwavering dedication, your profound selflessness every single day, not just to me, but to everyone who crossed your path, despite the immense personal burdens you were so clearly carrying. This isn't charity, my dear, he continued softly, his voice full of conviction, as Clara stood utterly speechless, tears now beginning to trace unheeded paths down her cheeks. Please consider an investment in kindness, in human decency, a heartfelt tribute to Eleanor's unshakable belief in the inherent good of people. Use it for your mother. Go to her. Be with her. That peace of mind, that ability to care for her, without this terrible, crushing financial weight upon your shoulders, that is something Eleanor would have cherished for you. It is certainly something I cherish for you. Clara tried to protest once more, to stammer out that it was too much, that she couldn't possibly accept such an overwhelming sum, but he raised a frail, papery hand, his expression gentle but unyieldingly firm. Please, Clara. It would bring an old man in the cherished memory of his beloved wife a great deal of profound joy and lasting peace to know that this has helped someone who gives so much of herself, so tirelessly, so selflessly, to others. This is Eleanor's wish as much as it is mine. Truly, his sincerity was undeniable, his gaze unwavering and full of a deep paternal affection. This wasn't just a gift of money. It was a gift of profound understanding, of heartfelt recognition, of a deep and unexpected human connection. It was a lifeline, a miraculous answer to prayers she had barely dared to whisper in her darkest, most desolate moments. With a trembling hand and tears now flowing freely, tears not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming disbelief and profound, soul-shaking gratitude, Clara carefully, reverently accepted the card and the check. I simply don't know what to say, Mr. Henderson, she managed, her voice choked with emotion, barely a whisper. Thank you feels so utterly inadequate for something like this. He simply squeezed her arm, his touch surprisingly strong, conveying a wealth of unspoken sentiment. Just knowing that it helps, my dear, is thanks enough for me and for Eleanor, he said, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. Now go. Be with your mother. She needs you. The hospital administration, upon hearing a carefully summarized, yet deeply moving version of the situation from a visibly touched head nurse, Mrs. Albright, who, it turned out, had also been a quiet recipient of a small, thoughtful thank-you note from Mr. Henderson for steering this busy ship with such unwavering grace and good humor, miraculously found a way to grant Clara an extended, fully paid leave of absence. Family always comes first, Clara, Mrs. Albright said, her usual stern, professional demeanor softened by an unexpected warmth. Go. We'll manage things here. Don't you worry. Within days, Clara was on a plane, the check safely deposited, her heart a tumultuous, soaring mixture of trepidation for what she would find upon her arrival and an almost unbelievable, radiant hope. She arrived at the small regional hospital where her mother, Eleanor, lay frail, pale, and weary. The relief, the pure, unadulterated joy that illuminated her mother's tired face when Clara walked into the room was a balm to Clara's soul, washing away months, even years, of accumulated stress, guilt, and gnawing anxiety. My girl, her mother whispered, her voice weak but her hand surprisingly firm as it gripped Clara's with a fierce, loving intensity. You came. You really came. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara wasn't just Nurse Clara, the capable, unflappable professional juggling impossible demands and hidden heartaches. She was just Clara, the daughter, there to hold her mother's hand, to offer comfort without words, to gently smooth her hair, to simply be present fully and completely, without the shadows of worry clouding her every thought. The money from Mr. Henderson was, as he had so generously intended, a godsend. It allowed them to consult a renowned specialist in a nearby city, a leading oncologist whose exorbitant fees and advanced diagnostic tests they previously couldn't have even dreamed of affording. The specialist reviewed her mother's complex case with fresh, expert eyes and, after extensive, cutting-edge analysis, proposed a new, more targeted and promising treatment plan, one that offered a significantly better prognosis than anything they had dared to hope for. There were no absolute guarantees, of course, the specialist had cautioned, but for the first time in a very, very long time, there was a renewed, tangible sense of hope, a clear, actionable path forward where before there had only been despair. The deep, worried lines that surround her mother's eyes and mouth began to soften. And seeing Clara less burdened, less haunted by the specter of financial ruin and the relentless strain of her demanding job, seemed to infuse her mother with a new will, a spark of her old, indomitable fighting spirit. There were quiet, precious afternoons spent with Clara reading aloud from her mother's favorite, well-worn books of poetry, just as she had when Clara was a little girl, their voices weaving a comforting tapestry of shared memories and unspoken, unconditional love. There were gentle, meandering conversations, filled not with anxious, whispered discussions of symptoms and prognosis, but with warm reminiscences, unexpected laughter, and tentative, hopeful plans for future, however uncertain that future still seemed. One evening, sitting quietly by her mother's bedside as she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, the soft moonlight casting a serene glow in the quiet room, Clara took out a pen and a fresh sheet of good quality paper. She wrote a long, heartfelt letter to Mr. Arthur Henderson. She poured out her heart, describing the specialist, the new treatment regimen, the incredible, almost miraculous flicker of returning strength and quiet optimism she now saw in her mother. She told him about the indescribable peace his extraordinary gift had brought her, a gift far more valuable and transformative than the monetary amount itself. It was a gift of presence, the gift of time, the precious, irreplaceable gift of hope. She ended the letter not just with an avalanche of profound gratitude that words could barely express, but with a solemn, heartfelt promise, a promise to pay his extraordinary, life-altering kindness forward in any way she could for the rest of her life. Weeks later, Clara returned to St. Jude's Hospital. Her mother was stable, responding remarkably well to the new treatment, and most importantly, she was filled with a renewed, quiet hope and a deep, comforting knowledge that Clara would be back to visit very soon, without the crushing weight of the world on her shoulders. A tremendous burden had been lifted from Clara's spirit, a burden she hadn't fully realized the sheer weight of until it was finally, miraculously gone. She was still the same dedicated, deeply compassionate nurse, but there was a new, discernible lightness in her step, a brighter, more serene gleam in her eyes. The shadows of perpetual exhaustion were less pronounced, softened around the edges. Her smile, once a brave, carefully constructed shield against her own pain, was now a genuine, radiant reflection of a heart that, while still bearing its indelible scars, was undeniably, profoundly healing. The story of Mr. Henderson's extraordinary generosity and the simple, observant kindness that had preceded it had circulated quietly, almost reverently, amongst the hospital staff. It wasn't idle gossip, but a poignant shared narrative, a powerful reminder of the profound, often unseen impact one human being could have on another. Nurses started leaving small, anonymous treats, a favorite chocolate bar, a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. For colleagues they noticed were having a particularly tough, demanding day. Doctors, usually rushed and focused, began to take an extra moment to truly listen, not just to their patients, but each other, offering a word of support or understanding. Even the usually gruff, intimidating head of surgery was seen sharing a quiet coffee and a rare moment of gentle encouragement with young, overwhelmed intern who looked utterly lost after a particularly difficult and tragic case. Mr. Henderson's gift hadn't just helped Clara and her mother. It had planted innumerable seeds of empathy, recognition, and quiet consideration that were starting to blossom, transforming the often impersonal, high-stress environment of the large, bustling hospital. It was a beautiful, undeniable ripple effect of warmth, thoughtfulness, and human connection. One evening, just before starting her night shift, Clara walked purposefully down the long, familiar corridor to the old, forgotten bench where she had once sat in such profound despair, feeling so utterly, hopelessly alone. In her hand, she held a single vibrant yellow daisy, purchased from a small, cheerful flower stall near the hospital entrance. She paused before the bench, the memory of that terrible night still vivid, but now overlaid, softened, and transformed by the radiant warmth of Mr. Henderson's unexpected, life-changing kindness. She placed the daisy gently on the worn, scarred wooden seat, a silent, heartfelt tribute to the quiet, elderly retired librarian who had seen her, truly seen her hidden pain, and in doing so, had reminded her and so many others that even in the deepest, most overwhelming darkness, a single, genuine act of kindness, a single, unexpected moment of profound human connection can illuminate the entire world. For as often in noticing the unnoticed, In acknowledging the silent struggles that lie just beneath the carefully maintained surface, that the most profound and lasting connections are forged. And it is there, in those quiet spaces of shared vulnerability and unexpected empathy, that the true healing begins, not just for the patient, but for the healer too, a gentle, powerful reminder that no one is ever truly, completely alone when compassion, in its myriad forms, lights the way.